And I'll put that in the chat later if you haven't written it down again. When I think about four myths that COVID is exposing about youth ministry, I look at these four. I look at the sense of the urgency. And yes, there is a sense of urgency. We only get so much time with each team. That's a fact. We all have eternal lives, but the opportunity to reach teams in these formative years has a timeline. But there's a sense of urgent, scrambling, urging that is sometimes forcing people to have anxiety that is unnecessary. As we know, God is a mighty and powerful God. It is on God to do this ministry. We just have the opportunity to be part of what God is doing. Yes, it's urgent, but it is not a crisis. It is not something where we need to panic. Is God will give us opportunities. The unsaved, those who want to grow, those who want to be discipled, there will be opportunities, and we just have to work within what is and not panic thinking we're scrambling to get it right. Second thing is the idea that somehow you can control things in the group. Uh, Two of my dear friends are going through very difficult times. Um, One is having a church split. It's just heartbreaking. A church split in her church. Um, she's a dear, dear believer, and her senior pastor has been faithful and committed to wanting to protect his people. And yet, there is another pastor in the church who really came from the outside and came with a perspective and a group of people where they really wanted to believe God and trust God. And they believed if we trust God, then we can gather and we can meet and we can trust God to keep us safe. And while all that sounds noble, what it did was it undermined the authority of the leadership of the church. And so it's creating a split and a divide, and it's breaking hearts and dividing believers. And it just breaks my heart. And it's hard because we can't control our group, can't control our churches, control our, I mean, frankly, even our families. And so just to acknowledge we don't have the control we wish we did because there are so many factors that are affecting things. One of the other myths that's happening is active teens listen better. I While I often loved getting kids in activities and stuff like that, and thinking if we wear them out, they'll be able to listen to the talk better. And there is some truth to that on some level. But as we've seen, doing virtual ministry, kids who are active sometimes don't listen better at all. They don't wind down because in the virtual ministry world, they have all the control over their space. They can choose to listen or not listen. They could choose to participate or not participate. And it's they could easily be turning their screen at the ceiling, and you can do nothing about it. And then there's a sense that many ministers have of I got to say something. I've got to be the leader. I've got to be the forerunner. I've got to have the answers. And I'm here to say, while we're navigating restrictions with flexibility, those are myths, and I want to debunk a little bit more about them. Ephesians 2:10 in the New Living Translation says, "For we are God's masterpiece." I absolutely love this translation. I love that word. I love how the ones who created that translation chose that word. We are God's masterpiece. God has created us so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. I look at that and I go, you and I are the masterpieces, and so are every one of our teens. And as we're talking about navigating restrictions, I want you to envision more and more ways to empower our teens to be the leaders of our youth ministry. And yet, so often, what hinders those possibilities is this very challenge: happiness versus joy during COVID. Happiness comes from the outside in. It's circumstances that are part of my life that add positive feelings to what's going on. Happiness comes from the outside in. And unfortunately, during these COVID crises, we cannot control a lot of life. Therefore, living for happiness is hard. It's hard. When I ask you, how has COVID limited happiness levels in your youth group? How has COVID limited happiness in your youth group? And what makes that limit most difficult? And why? I look and it's such a difficult time to help people believe that we can have things exactly the same way because there are so many restrictions. And yet I'm convinced that even if we can't have happiness, we can have joy and we can help our teens experience joy. And by helping them own more of what's going on in our youth ministries, they will have a chance to experience more of that joy. Because even though happiness comes from the outside in, joy comes from the inside out. Joy comes from believing that who we follow, why we do what we do, where we get our identity, what we value and treasure, and how we respond to those challenges add critical pieces to our level of joy. And again, while happiness comes from the outside, joy comes from the inside. And that's a piece that, regardless of the restrictions that exist, our teens, our youth ministries can help them to see that what they're doing and what they're choosing is critical to the future of their lives and the future of their youth ministry, your youth ministry, to help them to grow as people and to become disciples of Christ. When I think about what's going on in teens' lives, I think about helping them identify their own unmet needs. I look at simple things that become really apparent when you have eyes to see. Think about the need for safety and security. We wear masks, many of us, all day long, because that sense of safety and security is missing. We wear masks when we go to the grocery store. And here in Minnesota, every time we walk into a building, we're supposed to have a mask on. Maybe your community is different than that. Maybe you have many less restrictions, but I'm guessing wherever you're at has some safety and security issues. And I look and I go, teens identify that when they have this feeling of discomfort, one of the keys is an unmet need for safety and security. Second need, meaningful relationships. Talking the kind of relationships could be a parent-child, could be teen to teen, it could be sibling to sibling, but a meaningful relationship with shared dialogue. So often I hear about family relationships where it's power over. The older person has much more power and responsibility and has very little willingness to share the dialogue, to share the power, to share the relationship. And rather than build a level of intimacy, rather than build a deeper relationship, it creates a sense of resentment and pain. When I think of the third need, I think of this sense of closeness. I think about how much people long for intimacy. It's one of the things that has made COVID so difficult is that people miss face-to-face contact. They miss the personal aspect of relationships. They long for more. They long for a deeper sense of connection, and teens all the more so. The fourth one is feeling connected to a community. You know it, you feel it. If your church gets to meet together, you know the satisfaction and the joy you feel about meeting together. And if you have not been able to, you know the sense of longing to see your brothers and sisters in Christ, to see the people you're closest to. If you miss your work friends, if you miss your school friends, you know how it feels to be disconnected to a community, which is why so often we have this extra anxiety and how glad we are when we do get to see people. I think about those top three ones affecting a lot of the young women I know. sense of safety and security, meaningful relationships, a sense of closeness. We all care about community, but I think these bottom four, feel connected to community, a sense of control, and a sense of social status. I think those three, four, five, and six, affect young men more. And here's how I see the counterfeit being so very, very obvious. Feeling connected to a community, so many of the young men that I work with find a community in online gaming. Is it an intimate community, a sense of closeness? No. Is it meaningful relationships? Probably not. Is there a sense of safety and security? Maybe, because it's all in artificial world. But feeling a sense of connection to a community is something that online gaming gives some of our young men, which is why so many are choosing that rather than choose church or a youth group community, because they don't recognize how much they can get out of that if their unmet needs are really met. I also think about how video games give young men and women a chance for a sense of control. The games that they play where they get to role play characters, a sense of control in their destiny, they get to envision having more power and control, having more opportunities in life, giving them a chance to do some things in a fanciful way that really gives them a chance to expand and explore in a world that doesn't give them the consequences that expanding and exploring does in our world. I think about the sense of control that helps teens to take a chance and try out new ideas or say whatever's on their mind, because in this virtual world, there aren't the consequences. And that control gives them the power to do what they want, irrespective of maybe parental wishes or academic wishes or school wishes or social pressure. Because whether teens know it or not, they have an unmet need for a sense of control. Last one is a sense of social status. Again, talking to one of my young men yesterday, he was bragging about how good he was in video games. And really, he is so good at video games, he really wasn't bragging. I had asked him, what it's like. I said, one of my other teens is ranked such and such on the server. And I said, have you ever been ranked in any game on that level? And he said in kind of a quiet voice, many times. He said, I've been many times, I've been number one playing video games on my server. That sense of social status, especially for young people who are struggling in social ways, is huge, because we all have a need for success. We all have a need for social status and the sense of gaining. And if you don't feel like you can compete in music, you can compete in sports, you can compete in academic settings, to have a sense of social status through video games or other online activities really addresses, maybe in artificial ways, but really addresses that sense of social status. So while we're navigating restrictions, while we're trying to be flexible, I think it's critical that we recognize that if we're going to be successful, we need to help our teens in our community identify their unmet needs and maybe some of the ways they're meeting those in really kind of counterfeit or just a way that is not going to meet them on their deepest levels, the way an intimacy with Christ will, the way a commitment to a Christian community that is really committed. And in our case, to TreeHouse, where every time kids come in the door, they're reminded they're lovable, capable, and worthwhile, like the video said. We think that's vital. We think it's so important because the world is constantly beating them down. That first need, a sense of safety and security. The world is constantly beating them down, telling you that you are unlovable, telling you that you are incapable, and telling you that you are not worthwhile because you're not doing things the way the world thinks you should. So to help teens identify unmet needs, I think is vital as they're navigating restrictions. I want to talk about 9 keys to build ownership in your youth ministry during COVID. Excuse me while I take a sip. first one is coach, not control. A good coach always looks to maximize his players' success. A good coach doesn't seek for ways to make somebody who they're not. It seeks to help person become the best they can be with their strengths, overcoming their weaknesses and their shortcomings. And I look at the ways that teens can do that. I think about for myself, I need the coaches in my life to help me to maximize my strengths and minimize the impact of my shortcomings. Let's say that again. I need the coaches in my life to maximize my strengths and minimize the impact of my shortcomings. I can't help that some of them are there. Some of them will be there all of my life, and the same with your teens. But a coach doesn't seem to need to control that. It's how can we help you to navigate with those things, maximizing your strengths and minimizing the impact of your shortcomings. Second one is never give the impression, if you're trying to build ownership in your youth ministry, if you're trying to take restrictions and move beyond them, helping kids take ownership is critical. So it's important never to give the impression that you always have the best answers. If you want your teens to own it, if you want your teens to keep fighting for new ideas and be innovative and help you to be successful in what you're doing, you don't want to give the impression you're the answer person. You want to, as it says in the third one, develop a plan together. I love when I get to sit down with TreeHouse teens and get to let them brainstorm, let them think through all the possibilities. Because I want to ask teens to decide on the best solution, but that means we need to put out some ideas. We need to really put ourselves in a position where whether we're writing that on a real whiteboard or we're writing it on a poster board or we're putting it on Google chalkboards, whatever we're doing, I want to put kids in a chance where they can put down as many ideas as possible. Because brainstorming is essential to get all the ideas out there. And that's one of the things that becomes difficult sometimes, because it's so important, as you see in the bottom one, brainstorm ideas without judgment. So often people will start, well, they hear an idea they like, they jump forward and they're like, hey, let's take that one, we can do this and this and this. And they start ideating about ways that that one idea can become the solution to what's going on, rather than waiting and allowing all of the ideas come forward and allow each teen to contribute her or his answer. And I look at that and I go, if you want ownership, if you want all kids to participate, it's essential to allow all kids who want to have a voice to have a voice. And for those who don't have a voice, to be invited to have a voice, to remind them, in our case, that you're lovable, capable, and worthwhile. What you offer is essential to our youth ministry. We want you to be able to express yourself and share your ideas, because we really do want to hear what you have to say, because we believe your ideas will contribute to what we're doing. A couple more ideas for building ownership during this COVID crisis. Ask questions. Listen attentively. During my previous session, I talked about that, and if you want to take a look at deepening connections through COVID, you can watch that video. I think it's so important to learn to be a good listener. Our world is filled with people who claim they listen, and they simply don't. They just have a shadow of what good listening is, and sometimes not even that. Ask questions. As often as you can, ask questions that can't be answered with a yes or no. They're called open-ended questions. Answer questions that can't be answered yes or no. And if you can, avoid why questions, because why questions often put people on the defensive. Like, there's many good times to ask a why questions. But while you're developing teens, while you're helping them to grow as people, oftentimes why questions shut them down rather than open them up. So beware using why questions. Use them, but be judicious about it. I love praying, God, please, is this the right question to use? Next one is, and I love doing this because I think it's so helpful. Record, if you can. I mean, if they're writing them on the board, that's great. Or they're writing them on the whiteboard, whatever that whiteboard is for you, that's great. But when I have a chance to write on paper If I can be the note taker, I love doing that because it gives me a chance to maybe distill their thoughts. Maybe it's a little rambly, maybe, it's conceptually not solid, it's just kind of fragments. And I can hear what they're saying. And because I know them and I know their hearts and I know how they're trying to express themselves, I have maybe a chance to refine that a little bit. If I can't do that in the moment, I can do that on paper. And then maybe as I'm taking notes, I can record their solutions and maybe add a little bit of my own coaching to their sentence to help them to say. And so many times, just heard a couple weeks ago, is like, wow, that's really good. I said, no, that's your idea. I just put it into these words because I think that's what you meant. And they were like, but I was kind of rambly. It's like, no, but what you said was really good. I just needed to put it in a sentence form. And I think kids are appreciative because we are good listeners when we choose to ask questions and listen attentively and empower them to speak. And I think it's important. It's so important to ask teens to take ownership and take responsibility for the plan. Invite them to build, because if we want to move beyond these restrictions, we need their fresh ideas. We need them to help us. So what would you do? What do you suggest? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? What works for your friends? What doesn't work for your friends? Asking them to take ownership and responsibility for the plan because they know your heart is to have a great youth ministry. They know your heart is to help teens. And these are teen experts. As teens, they are experts on youth culture. So ask them to take ownership and responsibility for the plan you're developing together. And last but not least, definitely not least, empower your teens to set up a time frame. What will work? What is reasonable? Everybody's tired. Everybody's fatigued. I'm worn out. My capacity is lower. I was still working on this talk last night. Empower your teens to set a time frame. And then this is key, and an accountability process. Invite them to think through, how are we going to make sure this gets done? What are we going to do to make sure that these restrictions are navigated? How are we going to make sure that our youth ministry is effective? How are we going to make sure that these ideas move forward? How are we going to make sure that this small group who took on this task are going to follow through on it? How are we going to make sure that this group of people won't have one person, everything gets set on that person's shoulders because not everybody's stepping up? Empower your teens to take that and develop an accountability process. When I think about maximizing group members' strengths, I think about some things like these. Questions I need to ask. Questions that I think it's important to ask other teens, because teens know more of these answers than you might. Ask, who's a good listener? Who do you trust? Who do you think will really care? And it's so funny how often it's not their best friend. Well, it could be. It often isn't their best friend because maybe they think their best friend's kind of a knucklehead, or, that person's really fun, but they're not a great listener. They're fun to hang out with, but they're not a great listener. And so when you hear that somebody's a great listener, that person might be the person that when a teen is struggling and you know that they need a teen perspective, you can refer them to that teen and maximize that teen's strength. Who enjoys reading? That person might be your researcher. You can't do it all. You shouldn't try to do it all. Get that teen who enjoys reading to do a little deep dive into things. Find out what's going on in Snapchat. Find out what's going on in teens' world. Who's following who on Instagram. Get some youth culture in there where you're allowing a teen to do your work for you, to build up your youth ministry while navigating restrictions. You're maximizing your talent. You're empowering your teens. Who loves texting and messaging? They should be your messenger. I remember before Tina, our host, was talking, she was saying, I'm the president of a youth ministry, and I'm the one who's always texting and messaging people. She said it like it was a bit of work, but I love that she was so proud that she got that role and responsibility. Your teens who love texting and messaging, they might love that role and responsibility to the one who carries the authority and power to be the messengers, to be the inviters, to be the person who is sending the announcements. Who's a good storyteller? Invite that person to paraphrase the scripture. Let her or him take a parable and tell the story. Let her or him dramatize the story. Let your teens own it. Who likes writing stories, poetry, or lyrics? Let that person add content to your youth ministry, fresh content. Who likes taking or collecting photos? Let them also add content. Let them add visuals. May not be your professional level photographs, but kids love sharing and being contributors. Maximize your group's strength. And last but not least, I love that I can ask you this, is many of you are in church contexts. Who remembers conversations? Can you ask that person to recap the sermon? Now think about that. I haven't seen this too often, but we've done it at TreeHouse, and I love doing it, where you invite somebody to be the one who recaps either a previous lesson or something that went on in a retreat or the most recent talk, because a teen, A, owns it, and B, kids love listening to kids as they're on stage. So it's got to be somebody who enjoys that. But to give them a chance to reflect on what they've heard, it also helps you to know what a teen is hearing. Regardless of what you prepared, your listeners are still listening to what they're listening to. They hear what they hear. Their narrative is their narrative. And so I think it's neat to say, who remembers conversations? Could she or he be the person who could take that messaging forward? Now I think about how difficult it is to reach out to disengaged or socially awkward students. And I think about, who wants to reach out to that teen? Who really cares that that teen is disengaged? Who really cares that that socially awkward student is connected with? I'm just being honest, because some of us have a hard time with that. Some of us don't want to do the work. Some of us don't want to feel the rejection that a disengaged student might have. Socially awkward kids, how many times do you want to be told how awful the youth group is, or how awful that girl or that boy is? And, those socially awkward kids who feel judged, or whether it's actual judgments or they just feel the judgments because they've experienced it so many other times in other places. Those socially awkward kids who just don't want to be part of things. How can you reach out to them and help them to feel engaged? Well, it really helps if one of you, one of the leaders, could be one of the teens, wants to reach out to that teen. Number two, why was that teen involved before? If she or he is disengaged now, why was that teen involved? What attracted that person? Is there any way you could compensate for the restrictions that you have now to adjust to that? I think about ways that maybe the parent doesn't want the teen going to youth group for whatever reason, doesn't feel safe. Maybe they've heard the church wasn't safe, whatever. Maybe the teen was involved, but now she or he is not, but they're still going to work. Okay, well, they're going to work. Is it possible that you could meet them for 5 minutes during their break, where they walk out of, let's say, McDonald's, where they're working, and they walk out, and for 5 minutes you have a chat in the parking lot? They don't get a chance to connect with you any other way, but here you are, masks on in the parking lot, having a conversation, because you want to help that disengaged student re-engage, even if it's just on a one-on-one level. And I've done that many times before COVID, and I know it would work for you during COVID crisis. I look in and go, what do the teens care about? What if they're staying away, how are they filling that time? I can't tell you how much I don't really enjoy video games. I laugh about this, but it's actually true. I think I swear more when I play video games than about any other time in my life. And I choose not to swear very often, but I just get so impatient because I just don't have the skills. to be successful at video games. But I do work really hard to not do that around teens, because when teens care about video games, I want to find ways to give them a chance to include me. So because I don't take the pressure to be successful, I want them to teach me. It gives me a chance to connect with them. I've played a number of games I would never have played otherwise, because I wanted to spend time with that teen doing what she or he cares about. I can't tell you how many times I've listened to teens talk about their latest favorite anime or their latest favorite manga they read. And I look and I go, well, I don't watch anime and I don't read manga, but I love that they do, most importantly, because they think I care about them when I listen to them talk about what they care about. If you want to reach out to disengaged or socially awkward students, find out what they care about and care about that thing because that teen cares about it. A couple questions for you. Does anything work for you in this group? Put it in the chat. And why do you think it worked in your youth group? Last three. How can you reach out and to disengaged or socially awkward students? Can you join, I said this before, the teens replacement? Is there any way that you could join? Maybe it's a sport they're doing, maybe it's an activity they're doing. How can you, if it's appropriate, find a way to join in with what they're doing? You know, I think before sports were canceled, kids who couldn't come because of sports seasons, how can I go and be a fan? Even if I'm going to stand, I'm just up there waving, letting the team know that I'm their fan. I'm here, and to establish that relationship. So even if the student is not engaged in our youth program, that student knows I came and care enough just to see them. You know, again, can you visit the teen at work? And here's one that I think is vitally important during social distancing and distance education. Can you tutor the teen? Is there a subject you might be an expert on? And if not expert, more learned than the students you're serving? Is there a way you could tutor the teen? That might help you to reach out to those disengaged students where they wouldn't normally meet with you because they're not going to your youth group, but you can develop a relationship with her or him because now you're supporting their educational goals. You're helping them accomplish something that they care about. And maybe, just maybe, they'll enjoy that so much, they'll want to come to youth group. I've seen it before. I love the idea. Can you tutor the teen, encouraging them in their academics, bringing the life of Christ into that teen's life? A number of our TreeHouse communities are offering tutoring for their teens. They have enough computer and bandwidth and a reasonable enough internet speed where they're setting up workstations for teens in the community to use their computers and to continue their education, offering tutoring after school in order to connect, in order to reduce the academic gap that COVID is causing. Can you tutor teens if you want to connect? Does anything work for you as a group? Again, put it in the chat. Why do you think it worked for that team? I want to offer you a couple more things before we go. How can you get a teen to open up? Here's 4 quick ones. We're going to ignore the 4 listener traps. We just got a couple minutes left. So I want to offer these 3 actually, that's weird. One of these graphics duplicated. So let's go with these 2 graphics. If you want to help a teen to open up on a deeper level, take them to a deeper level, those 2 circles next to each other. On the left, envision this is something I care about in the left circle, the one that's outside the shared area. So the left portion. This is something I care about that the other person, let's say this is what you care about, and on the right side is what your parents care about. So you're having a conflict, your teen is having a conflict with a parent. Here is a conversation tool to help them identify ways that things might not be as difficult as they seem. So on the left are things I like, on the right are things they like, and in the middle are things we both like. It's a cool opportunity to help somebody see beyond their fractured relationship to see how much they might have in common. And there's often much more than seems in the midst of things. Here's another example of helping a teen to open up. I'm going to use the iceberg illustration there. I look at the iceberg and I go, below is what's going on underneath the surface. The top half above the line is what people see. It's the behaviors, it's the words they hear, it's the clothes you wear, it's how you present yourself. But underneath that line is what's going underneath the surface. The thoughts behind those things, the feelings behind those things, the beliefs behind those things. Invite teens to help them to see what's above, but then invite them to open up and let you see what's below. It's a neat exercise because it's non-threatening, and it really allows teens to have that some of that mystery and help teens to know that they're worthy of being understood, they're worthy of being noticed, they're worried about being cared about. And I love these two tools to help teens move beyond what's going on superficially to go into whether it's the deeper relationships, seeing how much we have in common between two parties that seem opposed, or between what's above the surface of the iceberg and what's below, to help them to see and recognize that their motives and their thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that motivate what's going on the outside may not always be a good match, and they might want to reconsider how all that's being projected. As we're talking about navigating restrictions through COVID, I just think of the critical opportunity we have to maximize the opportunity. When you bring it right back to this, we want to help you. TreeHouse wants to help you to identify what hopelessness looks like in your community. I want to remind you about this free assessment. It's there for you right at the website, treehouse.partners/teen assessment tool. Love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. And welcome back, Tina.